Israel, they were saying you can't live in this society without making that distinction, because that's what living in this society means, is you know the difference. Yeah.
I guess sort of piggybacking on that, what your thoughts are on institutional sort of reinforcement. I mean, so much of our economic system certainly functions on racism and thus necessitates it. I mean, how can we move on from this sort of psychic wound if, like, it messes everything else up?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that, that's a good question, and in fact it does lead to a certain kind of pessimism. But
They call it aliens.
yeah, calling an alien, right. But the way I conclude, and this is how I brought my work from South Africa, how it kind of came back to me here when I started thinking about the U.S., is that the politics that's happening all around the world about forgiveness, apology, and reconciliation has never had a very strong foothold in America. There's been always a campaign for reparations, but it's never gotten very far, and there's always very arguments. But I think that actually that becomes the politics. The politics is really, we need to think in this country about issues of acknowledgement, forgiveness, and reconciliation. If you think about it, the United States, we have a Holocaust memorial on Washington Mall, but we don't have a museum to the institution of slavery. There's been really no acknowledgement of the existence of slavery, the benefits that were derived from slavery, and the kind of the memory of the horror of slavery. Now, when I say my thinking about this issue of forgiveness and apology and reparations, it's not sort of the idea in my mind has more to do with the way that TRC was thinking about it in South Africa. Until we acknowledge that all of us, in some ways, are the beneficiaries of that system. All of us. Then it becomes possible, really for the first time, to retire the category of black and white. We hold on to black and white. Blacks, African Americans, hold on to the category of black and African, because they have to. Because if they don't, who's going to remember slavery? No one. So it becomes incumbent upon them to be the carriers of that past. But what about a society taking responsibility for a shameful and traumatic past? And through issues like reparations and apology and forgiveness and recognition as a way of saying, okay, we've lived long enough in the past. Let's move on. I mean, of course, I might as well be talking about aliens. Yeah.
Well, you said if we eliminate the category of black, then what would be the new black? Would we all be white then, or what?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
we wouldn't have. In the same way that the category is it's only a symbolic. It's a word to capture a position in the society. Really. I mean, it has all kinds of other things. There's pride and there's identity and there's a sense of history and all. But it's only to say that you're black or to say that you're white in this society is really either to say I'm dominant or I'm subordinate. So I'm saying, that what we should try to move toward is a language that recognizes that those categories had tremendous influence and power in the past, but they don't serve anybody well in the present. There's another way of saying it. Hans Lowald, who's a great psychoanalyst, he says that what the goal in psychoanalysis, in individual psychoanalysis, is to transform people's ghosts into their ancestors. And what does he mean? He means rather than having a haunting past, rather than us either through denial, let's say, oh well, it wasn't so bad, or I had nothing to do with it, or to say, I am a product of people who were captured and brought over, and I have to respect their memory. I have to, I have to hold on to that. Which is, both of those are kind of haunting pasts. You don't know those people. They're not. It's all kind of a symbolic link, typically. But transform them into ancestors, real people who had real lives, who had real experiences. That they're your family. That, in a way, it's sort of saying, move towards the way in which we think about ethnicity and having common national, and away from a category of race, which is almost by definition biological in conception. Yeah.
So we kind of do that in Canada to the natives. We actually don't call them even visible minority. We do have different policies, but in general, people don't think about them. They don't talk about them, and yeah, it's not good there for them either. So I don't think that just changing the language and not thinking that this is a problem is going to change it. In fact, I think because we don't think about them enough, we're probably relegating them to terrible land and giving them no services and just completely ignore them. And I don't see that this is the solution. The reason why people stick to their race is because they demand reparations for historic wrongs. And by you telling us, like me, because I'm not cynical about it, that I should just forget about it and like try and not talk about it so that everyone can get along and be happy. It's not
No, I'm not
something-
saying that. I'm not
We're
saying
clear
that.
of that.
I'm Canadian too. I don't know what this guy's talking about.
No.
Well, I mean, the Canadians have done they've really struggled. And they talk about the First Nation, right? Isn't that the language?
Yeah,
First
they talk
Nation.
First Nations, yeah.
What?
First Nations and Indians, yeah.
And I mean, but I'm not really just saying change the words. I'm saying if we continue with the words black and white, then I think we continue with this, what I call the humanistic fallacy. We think, well, things will get better, and we know what to do, how to improve things at UC Davis, and we try to do this, and in every institute. And I'm not against that. It's not that, but I'm saying that I think that as soon as the categories themselves impose a logic and a direction of policy that, in a way, is specious.
But what is the alternative? I mean, that's of course it's a category that continuously changes. Everybody knows that. I don't think anyone is unaware of that. But it is the heuristic that gets people together against a common struggle, and that's why people use it, even though it's not perfect. There is no alternative.
Yeah, but it could be misdirected. It could be,
True.
So, and in fact, there was this time. What would you say about? Because there was a movement in before the Civil War of people who got together and say we should make slavery a more humane institution. We should reform it. It's too hard. So let's have some child labor laws or something. Your conceptualization of the problem shapes the kind of policy directions, and to reform the institution of slavery would have been the wrong move, I think. So that's not, yeah.
Seems like the question of ghosts and making them ancestors seems to suggest that racism is something in the past.
What about the past?
Like it seems like your analysis is kind of suggests that racism is something in the past and it's a matter of dealing with memory. And how would that then address current structural racism that takes place in prisons and the way that prisons are you know, industrial prisons are organized, or just in terms
Well,
of,
yeah.
you know, things like that.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good question, and what I'm suggesting, the inequities that exist now, let's say the extraordinarily high incarceration rate of young black men, clearly, certainly a feature of racism. But what's the source of that? I would say, so what I'm trying to hold this, to pin this whole thing on, is that we actually tolerate it. There's a kind of a toleration for that, and we all in some way say, well, we know, we have some idea of the kinds of people that are being, I don't even know if I believe it, but in prison. But so I'm hinging the whole argument on the fact that there is not just an uproar over the
There is a
continued
way-
patterns of inequality.
But there seems to be a lot of, I mean, there seem to be people who are working on this. So is it from a particular standpoint? I mean, what kind of uproar is it a question of the recognition of uproar? Because
The
there are
recognition
people of uproar.
Uproar.
of uproar.
Because there are people who
Yeah,
are
no, I know,
angry,
but-
there are
oh,
people
right.
who work.
Well, sure, there is, yeah, but not compared to, let's say, I mean, I suppose we could say it's from where I sit, it seems like there's tolerance, and from where other people sit, there's intolerance. But I don't think so. I mean, yes, of course there are people who are very active and political and trying to bring about change, but if we think about the major sources of information, the media and all, you know, maybe that's not the right standard, but that seems to me, there's a certain kind of way we all do explain the inequality we give it a certain degree of legitimacy. And that's because we think racially. And we can't help but think racially, because we live in this society which requires us to think racially. Yeah.
Look, before, sorry, it's 5:30, so maybe if you have further questions, just stick around. Like Professor Prager, if you want to go to dinner, we're going to Village Pizza at 6. Stick around for that too, come see me if you're doing that. We can have more informal conversation now, but thank you all for coming. Next Wednesday, this room, 410, Russian food, and Dr. Laurel Rucker talking about reading Freud.